Paul was writing to the Ephesians, and he wrote these words: "It's in Christ that we find out who we are and what we are living for." And the fact is, as long as we see ourselves with blurry vision, we're never going to live out the life that God has called us to live. And when we see ourselves the way God sees us, with 20/20 vision, all of a sudden we see that we are valued, that we are complete, that we are courageous. But you know, living the Christian life is not a solo effort. It's not like playing a game of solitaire. We live the Christian life together. And it's a modern American phenomenon that some Christians believe that they don't need to be a part of a church. But the fact is, we don't really understand our identity until we're a part of a family, a church family. And then we need to really understand and wrestle with, as a church, how God sees us. And so today I'm going to challenge you to consider, as a Christian, as a part of a church, how does God see your church? How do you see 2020 with God's eyes at the church that you're a part of? And I would suggest that He's calling us, with rare exception, to be what I would call new generation churches. I'm going to tell you what I mean by that. A new generation church is a church with attendees whose average age is at least as young as the average age of the community in which the church exists. And so if you're in a community and you look at your church and the people of your church are 10, 20, 30, 40 years older on average than the people who are in your community, then it should be a wake-up call. It should be a time to say, wow, why aren't we reaching the next generation? It's so easy for churches, and you look around and you see so many church buildings that were built out of great intentions to last for generations, and they've been turned into restaurants and bars and clubs because somewhere, they lost touch with the next generation. Somewhere, those who were part of the church, slowly but surely, the church just became older and older and older, and they failed to understand the truth behind the words of the psalmist. In the book of Psalms 78, verse 4, we read this: "We will not hide these truths from our children. We will tell the next generation about the glorious deeds of the Lord, about His power and His mighty wonders." It's God's intention for us as churches to reach the next generation, to tell the next generation, to not hide these truths from our children and our grandchildren. Now, nobody would purposely hide these truths, of course, but we tend to hide these truths by the way we do church. In other words, we say the way that we have conducted church needs to stay the same because this is the way I want it to be. And so we send a message to our children and we say, what was good enough for us is good enough for you no matter what. And so often we say to our children, if you really want to connect with Christ, you're going to have to go to a different church, because our church is designed to meet my needs, and we're really not about reaching the next generation. Our children speak loud and clear to us about how sensitive we are to their needs. It's not typically when they're little and they're forced to go to church, but when a time comes when they make their own choices, if they stop coming, they're telling you, you've lost touch. And so 10 years ago, our church, the church where I pastor, Amplify Church, was one of the fastest dying churches in the city. And we had to realize, as we looked at the average age of the community we were in, which was 35, and we looked at our church where the average age was well over 50, somehow we were not reaching the next generation. And God didn't see us as a church that was designed for elderly people. God saw us as a church in which generations should be able to worship God together. And somehow we had to see ourselves that way. And we began to. And we began to understand the need to make a connection with the next generation. So we made a lot of different changes, a lot of choices to be able to do that. And one of the things we did is we changed, it affected our staffing. It affected our facilities. It affected our curriculum. We changed our adult services, where we began to, we stopped having a dress code. We made the services shorter. We changed so many things about our approach to church, including our music, which we were able to have music that still reflected the core values of the church, but it was much more youthful. So many things were on the table, and it all came from an attitude that said this: as opposed to saying, if it was good enough for me, it's good enough for our kids. We started with a question, and we said, what will it take to reach the next generation? What will it take to reach our children? And that governed everything. It changed everything. And as a result, in a book I wrote about it called For a New Generation, it starts with these words: For a New Generation is dedicated to the members and attendees of Amplify Church whose devotion, prayers, and generosity turn the dream of building a new generation church into reality. And I'd like to tell you the story about one of those members. Her name is Eleanor Evans. She was in her mid-80s when we started to make a change in the church 10 years ago. And she wasn't crazy about a lot of the changes. And several years later, I was talking to her, and I said, have the changes we made in the main service, have you gotten used to them? And she said, no, not really. I don't like the music. I wear earplugs because it's too loud. And I said, well, why are you still here? Why are you still praying and giving and supporting the church? And she said, because now my children will come, and my grandchildren will come. And I look around me, and I see the children and grandchildren of others coming to Christ and knowing Him the way I know Him. And that means everything to me. Becoming a new generation church, I believe, is getting a hold of the identity that God has for us. It's not about changing our core beliefs. It's not about changing our values. But it's about being willing to change our approach to church so that we can be a church that isn't here today and gone tomorrow, but a church of people who are committed to reaching our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren for generations to come.